7. The next day dawned, warm and beautiful as it always did in the scenic state. The base's atmosphere was almost that of a splendid vacation resort. As Brett surveyed the lovely scenery before him, the only thing that reminded him he was in an outpost of the American military-industrial complex was the distant cracking of gunshots from somewhere up the beach at Colonel Preston's walled-off live-fire range. He made his men drill there every morning, and in a few minutes more Brett would see a line of them coming up the beach, carrying their machine guns and looking rather pleased. The agent wondered idly at why they felt a need to drill with such imprecise weapons. The night before, Nightingale had been taken into one of the base's back rooms by a pair of armed guards. He had still been spewing his pseudo-philosophical nonsense as calmly as if he were giving a lecture. Maynard had remarked that the man himself was very different than his radio persona, seeming calmer and more stoic than his paranoid conspiratorial on-air rants would lead one to expect. Brett took a swig of black coffee and glanced over at the television. The distinguished-looking anchorman on the screen was reporting on Hector Nightingale's arrest for possession of methamphetamines and disturbing pornography. Then he moved on through the national news, which included mention of the fact that Carrie Knotts had been assassinated by Jack Tonawanda while giving a speech in Morgantown. Then came the weather. There was a tropical storm brewing off the coast. Brett set down his coffee and turned off the television. He was about to leave the room when suddenly an odd idea struck him. Odd ideas rarely struck this cold, practical man. For some reason, the strange place played tricks on his mind, and he picked up his portable radio and tuned it to Nightingale's station, as it was just now the time for his show to come on the air. He wondered what would be in its place. What he heard was that accented female voice, mechanically intoning 87, 23, 106, 34, 2, 87. Agent Maynard had seen humanitarian crises in her time. When she had been in the Air Force, she had seen camps in third world nations run by the military dictatorships there, where the weak and sick were herded in huddled groups by cruel men with machine guns, men whose faces bore the harsh aspect that comes of enforcing the brutal and amoral laws of nature. There were no pitiable groups of refugees to be seen here, and the surroundings were clean and polished, far from the stench and squalor of the impoverished country's camps. The soldiers here had that same look about them. There was by this point no doubt whatsoever in the agent's mind that this place was not merely a detention facility. It was a butcher's shop. She got the feeling most strongly in her talks with Colonel Preston. The man was strikingly charismatic, and quite young for a man of his rank, and rather handsome as well. He was charming and confident, and carried himself with a command presence that seemed so natural she doubted the academy had needed to drill him on it. He was a leader, unquestionably. Most people would have seen these things and thought he was the ideal officer. But Maynard was old enough to know better. Perfection can hold a horror unto itself, and there was something so perfect about the man's presence that it made him seem unwholesome. His appeal was the appeal of power, unadulterated power that comes only with the loss of all moral grounding. "You did exceptionally well bringing in that traitor," he was saying as he looked up at her from the tablet on his desk. "You and your partner are undoubtedly every bit the equivalent of any special ops unit. If this were an above-board mission, I would give you both medals." Maynard said quietly, "It was very simple. He offered no resistance. I have been on much more difficult ops against drug lords." Colonel smiled. "It's not that it was difficult. It's that you were willing to undertake it at all. Doing such a thing to someone who holds U.S. citizenship is the sort of thing that can be considered controversial in some quarters." "That's why it's a black op, right?" "Yes, it's a black op, but not as black as all that. When I say some quarters, I don't mean those cretins in the press. I mean some people up the chain who haven't got the stomach for what needs to be done." Colonel stood up and walked around the desk so that he was very close to Maynard. So close, and in such a posture, that Maynard felt he was trying to brush aside the barriers of rank and agency, and underscore primarily the difference in sex between them. "You have never been in the Eastern Theater, have you?" he queried calmly. "It's different over there. Here we have ideas about the value of human life, about the importance of the individual, that are completely unknown in that part of the world. In this country, we would rather 10 guilty men go free than one innocent man be imprisoned. It's not like that everywhere, though. The essence of teamwork, you know, is the sacrifice of the individual to the greater good. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask rather what you can do for your country." "Yes," she said. "But remember, our oath is to the Constitution, not to the country as such." "So it is," said the colonel. "The Constitution changes. At one time it did not even permit women to vote. So I would ask, which iteration of the Constitution do we swear to protect and defend?" "The present one," she answered. The colonel nodded, then stepped back and circled around his desk again. "I suppose you think it's a bit strange that I'm asking these questions. These philosophical debates aren't the stuff of intelligence briefings, I know. I'm trying to gauge your psychological fitness for the next assignment I'm giving you." "I didn't know you were authorized to give me assignments," she said coolly. "Thought that was the Bureau's lookout." The colonel waved a dismissive hand. "Battlefield promotion," he answered. "When the battle is everywhere, then everyone is a soldier. But I was saying about PsychFit. Psychological warfare has always been an interest of mine. I wrote some articles in the Journal of Modern Warfare years ago about it, and that's what's got me asking these questions. I wanted to know if you prefer to follow the letter of the Constitution or the spirit. And you've told me. Don't worry, there was no wrong answer." A beam of sunlight shone in through the eastern window and fell across the colonel's large chest, casting a golden hue on his blue uniform and making the impressive display of medals pinned there glisten brightly. "Enough!" he said abruptly. "You are dismissed." He gave her a crisp salute, which Maynard did not return. As a civilian, she was not required to do so. She turned and left the office, passing 2 vicious-looking Marines who were marching in. Maynard and Brett sat outside on the steps that led into the headquarters. Brett was studying schematics of a sniper rifle on his tablet. Maynard stared straight ahead, deep in thought. "I've received no communication of any kind from anybody at the Bureau," muttered Brett. "It doesn't make sense." "Oh, it does," said Maynard. "This is a dead zone. They are blocking any signal they don't want getting in." Brett nodded. "And most likely any they don't want getting out, too." "But DC would know it was being blocked. Any decent intel machine would—" "They want it blocked," she said. "They don't want to know, and he doesn't want to tell them. It's better for everyone that way. I've seen it a million times. I've just never been on the wrong end of plausible deniability before." "They have to be listening to us," said Brett. "Probably," said Maynard. "But they don't give a damn what we say. They figure there's nothing we can do." The distant rattle of the machine guns could be heard crackling through the palm trees, echoing off the walls of the gray complex. Tropical storm had been upgraded to a hurricane, and it hit the complex a few days later. For all their high-tech security, the basic elements of nature still played havoc. About midnight, the power was knocked out. The soldiers were of course prepared for these things, but it nonetheless hampered their efficiency. For Maynard, it was a golden opportunity. She and Brett hardly needed to exchange a word. They knew they would never have a better chance at finding out what was happening here, and they also knew their investigation must begin with the walled-off shooting range. Together, in the howling wind and rain, the two agents made their way over the wall. They were surprised to find themselves on the edge of a large body of water, out of which waves crashed over the sand. Their night vision equipment revealed a large bulldozer unaccountably parked near the trees, and they wondered at its purpose. It was clear that a considerable amount of excavation had occurred here, though so near the water it seemed rather incongruous. At the far end of the long sandy path was a large dark building, barely visible in the sheets of rain. Slowly, fighting the elements every step, they made their way to it, and Brett once again inserted the automatic lockpick into its large, though strangely old and worn-looking door. Inside was a long, dark corridor. Judging by the small lights affixed every 10 yards or so, it must have been extremely dark inside even when the power was on. As it was, they would never have been able to navigate it without the night vision goggles. It was unnerving how completely the long tunnel drowned out the roar of the storm. In spite of its dilapidated appearance, it was clearly very solidly made, and one could not help feeling that it was designed to prevent any sounds from escaping as well as entering. There was also the strange feeling of descending as they moved through the darkness, even though from the outside the building had appeared level. Finally they came to another door, and again Brett unlocked it in the same way, and in so doing moved them from a world of apprehension and gnawing anxiety to one of horror and hideousness that no one, however hardened, could look upon unmoved. It was a long block of archaic iron-barred prison cells, each one containing multiple captives who bore the signs of extreme malnutrition and savage torture. Some groaned and made hesitant motions towards the two agents, while others stared vacantly into oblivion. All were covered with horrific wounds, and many were missing limbs. Some lay still on the floor away from the others, and it seemed possible that these had died of their wounds. The captives were of all ethnicities and races, though the majority were dark-skinned, and amidst the incoherent groans, disconnected words in English, Russian, Arabic, and Spanish could all be heard. A babel of agonized accents chattered like so many insects in the ears of the horrified agents who walked slowly through the dungeon. The tortures inflicted on these captives were not only monstrous and cruel, but also blasphemous and bizarre. There were corpses crucified upside down and bodies dressed in grotesque costumes nailed in weird poses. There were tiny mummies hanging from the ceiling. There were evil phrases written on the wall. Hieronymus Bosch himself could not have imagined a scene as nightmarish as this surreal, impossible, fundamentally depraved hall of insane violence. And the two practical, rational, even cynical operatives believed that they had truly come to the gates of biblical hell itself, alive and pulsing with all the black energy of unlicensed power and insatiable bloodlust. And then, as if to complete the madness, the power came on, and the room became illuminated intermittently by a bright flashing red strobe light. It assaulted the eyes and made the scene look even more like the inferno the faithful fear, flickering and dancing and creating the appearance of motion where there was none. They had been trained to resist psychological warfare, but they came very close to the breaking point, and it was only by dint of their iron wills that they managed to press on down the hall. Finally, they rounded a corner and left the flashing crimson madness behind them, only to confront a new horror. It was a brightly lit room, bathed all in white fluorescent light. At its center was a small operating table, and on it, still wearing the same robe as when he had been captured, was the beaten and bloody Hector Nightingale.